In the weeks following the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989, archivists working to preserve East German state security records gained access to compounds that had been sealed and guarded for decades. One such facility, located approximately 40 kilometers southwest of Berlin, near the town of Belzig, revealed an operation that would take investigators months to fully comprehend. According to reports compiled by archivists from recovered Stasi documents and later corroborated by former operatives who agreed to speak with researchers, what they found inside the perimeter walls suggested an elaborate attempt to recreate American suburban life on East German soil. The facility, referenced in declassified training documents, had apparently been designed to prepare deep cover operatives, illegals, in intelligence terminology, for long-term assignments in the United States. Former trainees who later spoke with German investigators and academic researchers described an environment that included residential structures matching American architectural styles, commercial spaces designed to resemble American retail establishments, and various elements intended to simulate everyday American life. The level of detail, according to these accounts and supporting documentation, extended to fixtures, appliances, and even mundane objects carefully selected or manufactured to match American specifications. The entire operation had been abandoned shortly before the archives were opened, its occupants having departed in apparent haste as the German Democratic Republic collapsed. What remained was evidence of one of the Cold War's most psychologically intensive intelligence operations, a systematic attempt to transform East German citizens into convincing American suburban residents who could operate undetected while conducting espionage. Before we examine how this program worked and what it did to the people who passed through it, if you're fascinated by the documented operations of Cold War intelligence and the real human consequences behind espionage, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We bring you archive stories like this every week, revealing the truth behind some of history's most consequential secrets. Now, let's talk about how the Stasi attempted to build a fake America and the profound cost it extracted from those who lived there. The decision to create specialized training facilities for illegals had been made by Stasi leadership in the early 1970s, according to organizational documents analyzed by historian John O. Kohler in his comprehensive study of the East German secret police. Working closely with the Soviet KGB, East German intelligence planners had determined that traditional preparation methods were producing too many operational failures. Operatives with false documentation and basic cultural training kept getting caught. Their behavior, speech patterns, or cultural knowledge betrayed their origins under scrutiny. What was needed, according to planning documents recovered from Stasi archives, was intensive immersion. An operative destined for assignment in the United States needed to live as an American, not for weeks, but for months or years, until American behaviors became automatic rather than performed. They needed to internalize American ways of thinking and moving through the world so completely that even under stress they would not revert to patterns that might expose them. Architectural records and planning documents recovered from Stasi archives and now held by the BSTU indicate that facilities for this purpose were designed and constructed in the mid-1970s. According to Kohler's research, projects of this nature were overseen by Department Fucho A of the Ministry for State Security, the unit responsible for training illegals for Western assignments. Construction was carried out by military engineering units under extreme secrecy, with workers transported to sites in covered trucks and required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. According to recovered planning documents and testimony from former construction personnel who spoke with researchers after German reunification, facilities were designed to replicate American suburban environments of the period. Stasi planners had analyzed photographs, films, television programs, and reports from agents who had operated in the United States. They had obtained American architectural plans, building materials, commercial signage, and consumer products through intermediaries in West Germany and other Western countries. Items that could not be purchased were manufactured in East Germany to match American specifications as closely as possible. Christy Makrakis, in her 2008 study, Seduced by Secrets Inside the Stasi's Spy Tech World, documents how the Stasi devoted extraordinary resources to obtaining and analyzing Western consumer products, technology, and cultural materials for intelligence purposes. This extended to illegal training programs, where authenticity of environment was considered crucial to successful preparation. Former trainees who later spoke with investigators described facilities that included residential structures matching American suburban architectural styles, aluminum siding, attached garages, climate control systems, American-style kitchens and bathrooms. Interiors were furnished with items either imported from the West or manufactured to match American products. Communication systems simulated American telephone service, complete with appropriate dial tones and ring patterns. Electrical systems operated at American voltage and frequency standards, requiring separate power infrastructure. According to these accounts, commercial areas included dining facilities resembling American restaurants, retail spaces stocked with American or American-style products, and even service stations. American automobiles, purchased through various channels, were available for trainees to operate and maintain. Internal roads featured American-style traffic control devices, signage, and lane markings. The attention to detail extended to elements that seemed trivial, but that planners understood could betray an unprepared operative. Training manuals recovered from Stasi archives and analyzed by Makrakis reveal obsessive documentation of American cultural norms, consumer behaviors, regional variations in speech and custom, and subtle patterns of daily life that distinguished Americans from Europeans. Light switches, door hardware, plumbing fixtures, even the direction screws turned, all were standardized to American conventions so that trainees would internalize these patterns as automatic behaviors rather than conscious performances. According to personnel records recovered from Stasi archives, the first groups of trainees began arriving at facilities designated for illegal training in the mid-1970s. Documents indicate that candidates were recruited from various sectors of East German society, selected based on intelligence, language aptitude, psychological stability, ideological reliability, and physical characteristics that could plausibly pass as American. The selection process, as documented by Kohler based on recovered Stasi materials, began months or years before actual recruitment into the illegal program. Stasi recruiters identified candidates through multiple channels: university students studying English or American subjects, technical specialists whose expertise might be valuable, individuals who had demonstrated exceptional loyalty to the state. Candidates underwent psychological testing, background investigations examining families, and associates for political unreliability, and preliminary assessments of their ability to master English and adapt to different cultural environments. Those who passed initial screening were approached carefully, often indirectly. Recruitment into the illegal program came only after multiple evaluation stages, and only for candidates who had demonstrated both capability and absolute trustworthiness. One case documented in declassified Stasi files and examined by academic researchers involved a woman recruited from an academic background in the mid-1970s. According to her file, she had demonstrated exceptional aptitude for English language and American cultural studies. Her recruitment followed a pattern typical of the illegal program: initial assignment to translation work, gradual exposure to sensitive materials, evaluation of her reliability, and eventual approach about advanced training for specialized foreign assignments. According to later testimony she provided to investigators after being identified in the 1990s, she was motivated by a combination of factors: genuine ideological belief in the socialist system, intellectual excitement at the prospect of using her skills in practical application abroad, and the human desire to be recognized as special, chosen for an important mission only a select few could accomplish. The training program documented in recovered Stasi materials and described by former trainees who spoke with researchers was designed to be transformative. From the moment trainees arrived at facilities, they were forbidden to speak German. All instruction, all conversation, all written communication was conducted in English. Instructors, Mostly Stasi officers who had spent years in the United States under various covers, supplemented according to some accounts by Americans who had defected to East Germany, corrected not just grammar and vocabulary, but pronunciation, intonation, rhythm, and idiom. One former trainee who agreed to speak with researchers on condition of anonymity described the daily regimen and testimony documented by investigators. The training day began early and continued late into the evening. Meals were American in style and content. Trainees consumed American media, newspapers, television programs, films, radio broadcasts. Training sessions covered American history, geography, politics, social structures, and cultural norms in exhaustive detail. The physical environment was integral to the training. Trainees lived in American-style residences, shopped at American-style stores, ate at American-style dining facilities, operated American automobiles. They practiced ordinary activities, grocery shopping, cooking with American ingredients and appliances, maintaining living spaces according to American norms, navigating social situations that would be routine in American suburban life. According to training manuals recovered from archives, instructors observed trainees constantly, noting any behavior, gesture, or habit that marked them as foreign. The way someone held utensils, the way they gestured while speaking, the way they stood or moved, all were scrutinized. Trainees who demonstrated European patterns were corrected through repetition until American conventions became automatic. Training extended to subtle aspects of American behavior that outsiders might not consider significant. Manuals recovered from Stasi archives devoted extensive sections to American social customs, appropriate conversation topics, personal space norms, eye contact patterns, small talk conventions, tipping practices, consumer behaviors. These norms varied by region and social class, so trainees destined for different parts of the United States received specialized instruction in regional variations. One training manual, now held in the BSTU archives and referenced in academic studies, devoted dozens of pages to American social expectations and behaviors. Another addressed consumer culture in minute detail, how Americans shopped, what brands signaled particular social positions, how purchasing decisions were made, what possessions indicated regional or class identities. Facilities included spaces for specialized training in tradecraft, dead drops, brush passes, coded communications, surveillance detection, counter-surveillance techniques. Dark rooms provided instruction in document photography and microfilm development. Workshops taught concealment techniques for hiding materials in ordinary objects or specially modified containers. Trainees were also provided with legends, detailed false biographies they would assume when deployed. Each legend included birthplace, family history, education, employment background, accumulated details of a life never lived. Trainees were required to memorize these legends completely, to answer any question about their supposed past without hesitation, to embody these false identities so thoroughly that they became psychologically convincing. According to Kohler's analysis of Stasi methodology based on recovered documents, the most effective legends were those that explained why an operative lacked extensive documentation, frequent relocations, family disruptions, modest educational achievements that left lighter paper trails. Deceased parents eliminated family contact possibilities. Childhoods in regions distant from eventual deployment made verification harder. Working class backgrounds reduced expectations of professional credentials that could be checked. The psychological pressure of this training was considerable. Former trainees who spoke with researchers described the experience as disorienting and emotionally difficult. Isolated from family and friends for months, constantly observed and evaluated, required to suppress their authentic identities and inhabit false ones that initially felt like performances rather than genuine selves. The process took significant psychological toll. One former illegal who operated in North America and was later identified after German reunification described to researchers experiencing a kind of split consciousness. He sometimes forgot, briefly, which identity was real, whether he was the East German he had been born as or the American he had been trained to impersonate. The boundaries between performed identity and authentic self became blurred in ways he found deeply unsettling. Training also included preparation for the moral dimensions of espionage work. According to recovered training materials, trainees were taught they would need to lie to people who trusted them, to cultivate relationships for operational purposes, to betray friendships if missions required it. Instructors emphasized ideological justification, the righteousness of socialism, the aggressive imperialism of American capitalism, the historical necessity of the intelligence work they would conduct, the development of cognitive frameworks that would allow trainees to compartmentalize their actions was considered as important as any technical skill. Not all trainees completed the program. According to patterns documented by researchers examining Stasi personnel records after German reunification, a significant percentage of those who began training were eventually removed from the illegal program. Some could not master the language and cultural knowledge to required levels. Some demonstrated psychological instability under the stress. Some expressed doubts about the mission or methods, raising concerns about reliability. Failed trainees were generally reassigned to other Stasi positions or government agencies, their knowledge of the training program considered too sensitive to allow return to ordinary civilian life without ongoing surveillance. Those who completed training underwent final preparation involving rehearsals of their deployment. According to operational documents, trainees would leave facilities temporarily, traveling to West Berlin or other Western locations, where they would practice operating under cover identities in real-world situations where discovery would have genuine consequences. These exercises were supervised from distance by handlers who observed how trainees performed under actual operational conditions. Intelligence analysts who have studied declassified Stasi records estimate that between 100 and 200 illegals were trained and deployed to North America during the Cold War period, though exact numbers remain uncertain due to incomplete documentation and ongoing classification of some materials. Not all went directly from training to America. Some spent additional time establishing cover identities in third countries, living in Canada or Mexico, building documented histories, obtaining genuine credentials or work experience that made their legends more convincing. The operations these illegals conducted varied considerably. Some worked primarily in support roles, serving as couriers or communications links. Some focused on industrial espionage, using legitimate employment at technology companies or research institutions to access proprietary information. Some specialized in recruiting American citizens with access to classified information, identifying potential assets, and making initial approaches. The woman from an academic background who had been recruited in the mid-1970s successfully established herself in the United States in the late 1970s. According to documents later compiled by investigators, she settled in the Washington, D.C. area and obtained employment that provided appropriate cover. For approximately 2 decades, she lived an outwardly normal American suburban life. During those years, according to evidence later compiled, she served primarily as a support agent. She received and transmitted communications for other operatives. She stored materials for dead drops. She provided safe locations for meetings. She conducted counter-surveillance operations to determine whether other operatives were being watched. Her role was not dramatic, but it was valuable to broader intelligence operations. Her identification came not from operational mistakes, but from information provided by a former Stasi officer who cooperated with German and American investigators after reunification in exchange for consideration on other matters. The officer provided information about illegals who had been trained and deployed to North America. When FBI agents made contact with her in the late 1990s, investigators have not publicly disclosed the exact date to protect ongoing intelligence matters. She initially maintained her cover identity. Only when confronted with documentary evidence from Stasi archives did she acknowledge her actual identity and role. She was charged with conspiracy to commit espionage and with acting as an agent of a foreign government without required notification. Because the German Democratic Republic no longer existed, and because much activity had occurred years earlier, prosecutors faced challenges. She eventually agreed to cooperate, providing detailed information about her training, her operations, and other Stasi illegals she had known or worked with in exchange for a reduced sentence. In interviews with FBI debriefers, she provided extensive descriptions of her training and the preparation she had received. She described the mock American environment, the intensive language and cultural immersion, the psychological pressures of living a false identity for so many years. She described the process of gradually internalizing her cover identity until it felt, in many ways, more real than her original self. She described the disorientation after identification when she was forced to reclaim the German identity she had spent 2 decades suppressing. When asked why she had continued her intelligence work even after the collapse of East Germany and the end of the Cold War, she struggled to articulate a clear answer. She said that by the early 1990s, she no longer believed in the ideological justifications she had been taught. The socialist system she had served had proven corrupt and unsustainable. The cause she had risked her freedom for had been based on illusions, but she had continued anyway, she said, because by that point, her cover identity was who she had become. She had lived as an American for so long that she no longer knew how to be anything else. Returning to Germany, reclaiming her original identity, acknowledging that her entire adult life had been a performance, these possibilities felt more frightening than simply continuing the operation even after it no longer served any meaningful purpose. She was eventually sentenced to a term of imprisonment, served several years, and was released and deported to Germany. By that time, she had no family connections there, her parents had died during her years in America, and spoke German with a noticeable accent, her native language having been displaced by decades of speaking only English. According to researchers who have tracked outcomes of former Stasi illegals, she struggled to reintegrate into German society and lived in relative isolation until her death in 2018 at the age of 71. Other illegals who trained at Stasi facilities had different outcomes. Some were never identified. Some disappeared when investigations began in the 1990s, abandoning their cover identities and vanishing. Despite extensive efforts by German and American authorities, many were never located. Some investigators believe they returned to Germany under different identities. Others believe they might have obtained new false documents and remained living under unknown names. The question of what became of all illegals trained and deployed remains partially unanswered. According to data compiled by German authorities and cited in academic studies, dozens had been identified and located by the early 2000s. Some were prosecuted and imprisoned. Some had died before they could be located or charged. Others were living under various circumstances, some in Germany, some in other European countries, some in the United States, where they remained under their assumed identities because authorities determined that prosecution would be impractical or would not serve public interests, given the passage of time and the end of the Cold War. The human cost of the illegal program extended beyond the operatives themselves. The training facilities and the preparation conducted there created people who existed in a strange psychological space between their original identities and the false selves they had been taught to perform. This existential uncertainty affected not just those who were caught, but even those who were never exposed. According to German media reports from the early 2000s, a woman contacted authorities with information about her sister, who she believed might have been trained as a Stasi illegal. The sister had disappeared from East Germany in the early 1980s after telling family she was being assigned to a government position that would require relocation and prevent regular contact. For years, the woman had received occasional letters, postmarked from various Western European locations, assuring her that her sister was well but providing no details about her life. After reunification, the woman had attempted to locate her sister without success. The letters had stopped in the late 1990s. When she learned about the illegal program through media coverage, she wondered whether her sister might have been trained and deployed abroad. Investigators searched Stasi archives and located a file confirming that the missing woman had been recruited into the illegal program, had undergone training, and had been deployed to the United States under a false identity in the early 1980s. The file indicated assignment to establish cover and to recruit American intelligence assets. The last documented communication to Stasi handlers was dated 1989, just before the collapse of the German Democratic Republic. A joint investigation with the FBI attempted to locate the woman using the cover identity documented in her file. The search was unsuccessful. The identity had no verifiable existence in American records after 1990. Whether the woman had died, assumed another identity, or simply disappeared into American society could not be determined. The sister who had contacted authorities told investigators that even after learning the truth, she still hoped for some reconnection, but she acknowledged that if they did reconnect, she had no confidence she would recognize her sister, or that her sister would be the person she had known before the early 1980s. The training and the decades of living a false identity would have transformed her into someone fundamentally different. Facilities used for illegal training were closed in late 1989 as the German Democratic Republic collapsed. According to records, senior Stasi officers ordered evacuations and destruction of training materials. Trainees who were at facilities at the time were sent away with instructions to destroy any documents or materials connected to the program. In the chaotic final weeks of the German Democratic Republic, some Stasi officers attempted to destroy archives documenting the illegal program, burning files or shredding documents that would have identified operatives deployed to the West. But the destruction was incomplete. When archivists gained access to Stasi headquarters and storage facilities in late 1989 and early 1990, they recovered extensive documentation including training manuals, personnel files, operational reports, and planning documents for training facilities. Former training facilities were eventually turned over to German municipal authorities. Some sat empty for years, falling into disrepair. Materials and equipment were removed or sold. According to researchers familiar with the sites, proposals emerged to preserve portions for historical and educational purposes, though these proposals generated controversy. Some argued that preservation would serve important educational functions. Others argued that it would romanticize intelligence work that had caused genuine harm. The broader question of what to do about identified Stasi illegals remained complex. Many had committed crimes under German and American law, espionage, fraud, identity theft, but many had also been, in a sense, victims of a system that had recruited and manipulated them, young people indoctrinated into serving a cause that ultimately proved hollow. German and American authorities made pragmatic decisions based on individual circumstances. Those who had clearly committed serious crimes, stolen classified information that compromised national security, recruited American assets who committed treason, were prosecuted when they could be located. Those whose activities had been more limited, or who had ceased operations after the Cold War ended, were generally not pursued, particularly if they cooperated with investigators and provided information about the broader program. The question of responsibility in cases like this is complicated because it requires assigning blame among individuals who were operating within systems that shaped their choices and limited their options. The East German state that created the illegal program bore responsibility for constructing a system that transformed ordinary citizens into deep cover operatives through manipulation, indoctrination, and extensive training designed to suppress their authentic identities. The Stasi officers who designed and conducted the training bore responsibility for implementing that system. The illegals themselves bore responsibility for the choices they made to participate, to deceive, to steal information, even when those choices were made under circumstances of limited information and ideological indoctrination. But the systems that created these circumstances were larger than any individual. The Cold War divided the world into opposing camps and created incentives and justifications for espionage. Both sides, East and West, operated intelligence services that recruited, trained, and deployed operatives to steal secrets, to recruit assets, to deceive and betray. The Stasi's illegal program was perhaps more systematic and more psychologically manipulative than some others, but it was not fundamentally different in kind from intelligence operations conducted by many nations during the Cold War. The individuals who passed through training facilities were, in most cases, neither heroes nor villains. They were people who made choices within constrained circumstances, who believed or told themselves they believed in causes that would later prove illusory, who lived false lives for years or decades until those lives became, in psychological terms, more real than the authentic identities they had suppressed. Some caused genuine harm through their espionage activities, some accomplished relatively little. Most eventually faced consequences ranging from imprisonment to deportation to the quieter but no less profound cost of living with knowledge that substantial portions of their lives had been performances in service of a cause that had collapsed and been discredited. The woman from an academic background who had been recruited in the mid 1970s was 28 years old when she entered training. She was approximately 50 when she was identified in the late 1990s. She was 71 when she died in Germany in 2018, speaking German with an accent because English had become her primary language during 2 decades of living a false American identity. In between, she lost any clear sense of who she actually was beneath the layers of training and performance and deception, living in a kind of identity limbo where neither her original self nor her constructed self felt authentic or complete. The facilities where she and others like her were trained to be Americans were abandoned in 1989, their purpose rendered obsolete by historical changes the people who built them never anticipated. The existence of these facilities had been closely guarded secrets. Their exposure after the fall of the Berlin Wall revealed the extraordinary lengths intelligence services went to in attempting to create perfect cover identities and the profound human costs of transforming people into something they were not. Some materials from these facilities have been preserved in archives, serving as documentation of Cold War intelligence operations and their impact. The physical structures themselves have largely been demolished or repurposed. What remains are archived photographs and documents, academic studies analyzing the methodologies employed, and the memories and testimonies of those who were there, both the operatives who were transformed and the families who lost loved ones to false identities they could never fully escape.